look to someone with dyslexia? Well, David Artuso grew up thinking all people saw words on a printed page just like he did. Jumbled, blurred images, more like a puzzle than anything else. Throughout his young life, reading was a huge struggle for David. But his grade school teachers thought that he was slow and lacked focus. So he was placed in a learning disability class. It wasn't until he was halfway through college that he began to understand what was wrong and to see clearly for the first time in his life.
The problems I was having at school were across the board. However, they primarily were with reading and spelling. I would reverse letters, I wouldn't spell things properly. It was hard for me to read. Nobody could really tell me what was going on. I just couldn't learn. I couldn't grasp it.
We didn't know why he was having the trouble that he was, but we didn't know anyone to find out about it either.
The default was, well, I must just be dumb.
When he was put into the special needs class, I just assumed the teachers knew what they were doing and that that was the best for him.
My mom was very concerned about what would happen to me in life. You know, would I be able to make a living? Would I survive?
There was something wrong that he wasn't able to do the things that the others did.
You try to hide where you have flaws, and this certainly was a big flaw and not one that I could really hide all that well. I was born in Chicago Heights, Illinois. We moved out from Chicago when I was 6 years old to Southern California.
When Tony and David were growing up, I didn't see any difference with them.
When I went to first grade, this is when they first started noticing that I had issues with learning. My first grade teacher, she was writing in my reports that I would get frustrated, that I just couldn't focus, that I was trying too hard.
The first thing they did was assume he was hyperactive and put him on Ritalin.
So I started taking the Ritalin, and that was a very depressing sort of drug experience. At one point, I just up and left the class.
It made Dave very fearful, and so we stopped it quite soon.
We got tutors in for the summer to help me try to catch up because I was falling behind. But they couldn't, nobody could really put a finger on what was going on. One of the tutors, she suggested offhand that, hey, maybe he's dyslexic. But because I crawled correctly as a baby, they dismissed it. And at that time, the developmental experts thought, well, you know, if you didn't crawl correctly, then that was a sign of dyslexia. But if you could crawl correctly, then you didn't have it. So that got dismissed, unfortunately, too quickly.
As he progressed in second, third, fourth grade, the teachers felt he wasn't learning fast enough. I couldn't really see it at home because he didn't have homework in the early years. As the grades progress, you have to be able to read more. That was the thing. So that's why I read his lessons to him, and then he could understand that.
David's problems seemed to revolve primarily around reading and spelling. To him, no single word would look the same twice, as the letters and words appeared to randomly change order.
Whereas most people have one or two fixations, eye fixations on a page, and they're reading 3 or 4 words at a time, I can only clearly see about 3 letters. Everything around those 3 letters are distorted. They're moving, the black part of the letters are bleeding into the white background, it's pulsating. It's almost like you're trying to see an image through water that's moving. I, of course, assumed everybody saw this way. One of the things teachers like to do is have, you know, the young students sit in a circle and we're going to read, okay, each student read a paragraph. So I'd count the number of kids ahead of me to figure out what paragraph I would get, because I needed time to rehearse it. It wasn't something I could spontaneously read without just sort of stumbling over myself. And of course, you know, kids thought that was funny and would snicker and laugh.
David always felt he was a failure because his parents didn't understand his learning disability. There was nobody out there to inform them, to tell them what was being done research-wise.
David's parents and teachers were frustrated by his struggles in school. They didn't understand the perceptual problems David had to work through, and David didn't realize that the distortions he was seeing were out of the ordinary. Eventually, he began to believe the taunts of his classmates, that he was just dumb.
I seemed to be very bright and smart, but I just couldn't read and I couldn't spell right. And that's kind of something you tried to hide and did your best to overcome, and not really let anybody know that you weren't smart, because you're supposed to be smart. Some people said, well, he's lazy, he's just not trying. Those are the sorts of labels that you get because nobody can figure out what the problem was. After 4th grade, it was obvious that I was struggling. So for 5th and 6th grade, the school system decided to put me in totally self-contained classes for the learning disabled.
School districts, they didn't want us to do any labels. You couldn't diagnose a child with dyslexia or give that title to them, because if it required extra material or an extra person, it was eating up the general fund. So what most schools would do in any state was dump them, and that's what we used to call it, dump them into resource.
That didn't meet his needs, so he wasn't happy there at all.
The lesson plans included gluing beans on letters, and this is something you would do possibly in kindergarten, 1st grade. It was really kind of warehousing me. It was pretty much warehousing all the students that were there. It was just a way of keeping us out of the normal classes so that we wouldn't get in the way. Reminded me of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They ran me through a battery of IQ tests, and they were amazed at the results, because the results showed that I had a genius IQ, and they were all baffled.
David Artuso was labeled a special needs kid because of his inability to read. He stayed in the learning disabilities class for all of 5th and 6th grades. But ironically, as part of the program, some routine testing was done on David, and to everybody's shock, it revealed that David had a genius IQ in areas other than reading.
When we got to junior high, there was Whitman Junior High, which at that point was an experimental school. They mixed all the bright kids, all the learning disabled kids, and all the normal kids. The learning idea there was I would only be in the learning disabled classes for those areas that I needed that help for.
When David came in and I looked at his records, I was wondering why he was going to be in my class, because he had a very high IQ, but he couldn't read past 3rd grade. And he would stumble. And one word that he would know the first time through, he didn't recognize the second time.
She got these reports and she looked at them and realized that, I was extraordinarily bright. And so she really campaigned for me to be in some of the mentally gifted minor program classes. And those 2 years at Whitman Junior High were very formative in helping me to realize that I could succeed, that I wasn't just dumb.
Barbara's interest in David's situation and her help along the way were a huge boost to him. She encouraged him to run for 8th grade president. He did, and he won. But Barbara and David's family continued to be frustrated in trying to figure out what was causing his reading problems, especially since it was time for David to move on to high school.
When he went to high school, they were a little confused as to what to do, because he had been listed as disabled educationally, and then he was mentally gifted.
There was, thankfully, a clerical error. I was put in regular students' classes with all the normal kids.
I know high school was difficult for him. I helped him, but there's still a lot he had to do in class and everything. He always did as much as he could. So he didn't give up, but it was a struggle for him.
Pretty much all I did was study. I would go to school and then come home and start working on homework immediately.
His mother helped him tremendously, read every one of his assignments to him every night, working 6 to 8 hours a night, 7 days a week, got him through high school.
I wanted to do what I could to help him, because in this society, in this age, you really do need to do well in school if you're going to do anything later in life. So I just felt I was able to help him, so I should. I was his mother.
They still didn't know what was wrong. The natural thing was, well, maybe he needs glasses. And so I went to, normal eye doctors, and they're like, no, his eyes are fine. They didn't realize how painful it was to work through the distortions. They weren't even aware that distortions were there. It was very embarrassing and very detrimental to my self-image.
Even though he took 3 times longer than his classmates to finish his work, David managed to become an honor student and graduated from high school as a member of the National Honor Society.
When David graduated from the 12th grade, I was so proud of him. His parents were. That gave him the will to try college.
We tried to determine, what I would be good at and what I could do. When I went into college, I went to Cal Poly Pomona, and I was an architecture major for the first couple of years. I then went into the seminary to become a Catholic priest with the Salesians of St. Bosco. I lasted about a semester there for various reasons, one of which was, you had to learn Latin, and my goodness, I had struggles with English, so throw Latin at me, that was pretty much an impossibility. So when I left the seminary, I continued at Cal State Long Beach.
During his junior year, David was reading his Introduction to Psychology textbook when an item caught his eye. In a section on disabilities, there was a paragraph about dyslexia. His curiosity was sparked. David mentioned to his professor that someone in his past had wondered if he might be dyslexic.
And he said, well, Helen Erlin's on campus here, and she has an experimental program that she's working with where she has tinted lenses that correct for dyslexia. You should go talk to her. It's free to students. At this point, there's been all sorts of things thrown at me as, ways to solve my problem. So I was kind of skeptical about Helen, but, what did I have to lose?
David had initially been diagnosed early as having dyslexia, as having ADD, as having ADHD, and because he was very verbal and seemed very bright, but yet couldn't achieve, it was very frustrating for everyone. I put him through a sequence of perceptual tests.
And she was the only one over all these years who had really been able to say definitively that, yeah, you sound dyslexic.
Had lived his whole life with a mysterious learning disability. Now, as a junior in college, he was still struggling with major perceptual problems. He was referred to Helen Erlin, an educational therapist at Cal State University in Long Beach. It took all of about 10 minutes of chatting with David about his history for Helen to pinpoint the problem. He was a classic dyslexic, and yes, there might be a solution.
The Erlin Institute corrects perceptual processing problems that affect attention and concentration and reading and performance, and also can affect depth perception, and also can create headaches and other physical symptoms.
In Helen's research on people with reading problems, she came across a phenomenon called scotopic sensitivity syndrome, or SSS. Simply put, SSS affects the brain's ability to understand visual information. Printed text isn't clear or stable, so reading can be slow and inefficient, causing you to skip words or lines, reread passages, or have poor comprehension.
There's a visual system that goes beyond the eye. The eye becomes the camera that transmits the information to the brain. And it's the brain where you have this huge visual cortex that has to read and interpret that information. And when things are not happening, and the brain isn't able to interpret it correctly, the brain then becomes overactive and things start to happen. That's why we have these things called optical illusions. For my population, putting black print on a white background creates these type of optical illusions. When the eye transmits the information to the brain, it doesn't go as pictures, it doesn't go as words or letters or numbers. That information is converted into wavelengths of light. So if we take white light and put it through a prism so that all the signals travel at different speeds, that's your different colors of the rainbow. When we're going in and finding out for each person's brain, because everybody's different, what are those signals which are creating a problem, and only filtering those signals that create a problem and just the amount that they need to be filtered.
While experimenting with color overlays, Helen discovered that her subjects experienced an amazing improvement in their ability to read. Gone were the usual crazy distortions and the pounding headaches that came with them. Then it occurred to her, why not create eyeglasses based on this phenomenon? And so the idea was born that led to her invention, Erlen's spectral filters.
And she brought out this case of all these different colored lenses, and then we started putting them in front of me and having me read. And, you know, when we got to the red lenses, it's like, my gosh, the page started clearing up. And all these distortions and all the motions and all the energy just started disappearing. So we honed in on my color.
I think the biggest surprise for the students that we work with is that when you come up with the right colored overlay or the right color Erlen spectral filters that are worn, that all their problems immediately go away. It's not that they have to work or practice with it, not that it takes time, that it's 1 minute the page looks like a mess, and the next minute it's perfect, and it stays that way.
It was amazing. I could see the entire page clearly. It wasn't just letters with all this motion happening. It was just very calm. And I wasn't getting a headache. Got through 15 minutes, and it's like I'm supposed to be having a throbbing headache at this point, and I was fine. Then Helen was like, come on, let's go outside. Because one of the things that I wasn't aware of is that dyslexia pretty much flattens your world.
You've never seen the world in 3 dimensions.
You don't have depth perception. You don't have a good deal of depth perception. So we went outside, and I looked up at a tree, and the trees just pulled apart.
The first time you see your world in 3D, it's a really dramatic change and a dramatic experience.
It was like going from a flat book to a pop-up book. It was awesome.
When David found out from Helen Erlen about these glasses, and he tried them on and so forth and saw that they did work, we were very happy, of course. It was a surprise to us that the glasses could be that much help.
One way of thinking about it is, you know how when you have a radio or a television set and you're getting a lot of static and distortion, and how difficult that makes it to hear things or to see things, so you go in and you just adjust it and fine-tune it. That's what we're doing for the brain. We're adjusting and fine-tuning it and getting rid of all the static.
When we found my tint, I knew it. Everything cleared up. All these distortions, they just melt away.
David Artuso had grown up unaware that his reading difficulties had an underlying cause. Now through his new tinted glasses, he could comprehend words on a printed page for the very first time. No headaches and no strain. The confusion, struggle, and feelings of inferiority that had plagued him throughout his life melted away. And with his special lenses, for the first time in his life, David could see the world like most people do.
The thoughts at the moment are like, really? This is how everybody sees? This is easy.
Change is not supposed to be immediate in the field of education, and many people will say, gee, if you get an instant change, then there's something wrong with the process. So it's something I've had to fight against even, but yeah, the change is absolutely immediate and it stays that way.
The question has come up, you know, oh, you're looking through a tinted lens, you know, certainly the whole world must look rose-colored. I know folks that have blue tints or purple tints, and they all see fine. It doesn't make the world just rose-colored, if you will, or blue or purple. It helps vision immensely, and it really doesn't throw off your color perception at all.
He's done a lot of things in his life. I really attribute it to the fact that he finally had enough confidence in himself to go for it, because as soon as he got those lenses, that was it.
If he had never found the glasses that did solve his problem, I don't know what he would have done.
It's a thrill to be able to give back to individuals and change lives and make them understand and feel good about themselves.
I don't read or try to do anything visually intensive without them. That would be fruitless. I'd be, you know, in a headache in 5 to 10 minutes.
For me, it's one of the joys of being able to give them the gift back of you're not dumb and you're not stupid and you're not lazy and this wasn't your fault.
David is now a successful producer of educational computer games and other software. He got married in 2008, and he and his wife plan to start a family soon. Once they do have children, the Artusos will be on the lookout for signs of dyslexia. If the need arises, they'll know where to turn for help. Because for more than 25 years, David has considered Helen Erland to be his friend and his vital link to a whole new way of looking at life. To learn more about David Artuso and Erland's spectral filters, visit our website. I'm Jewel. Join us next time for another remarkable story of personal triumph on The Incurables.